What if I told you I found out the hard way? My name is Jonathan Miller, I'm 49 years old, and I was born in Chicago. But I lived in Los Angeles when something happened that turned my existence upside down. I died for 10 hours. It's not a figure of speech, it's not hyperbole to get attention. My heart stopped, my lungs collapsed, and an entire team of professionals signed the document declaring me dead in the early hours of a foggy California November. During those 10 hours of clinical silence, my eyes saw what I never thought was real. Before reaching this point, it's worth understanding who I was. I prided myself on being a skeptic of the soul and a worshipper of fame. An actor since my early 20s, I starred in suspense and psychological horror films, acclaimed for intense roles and awards for dark performances. The media called me the face of fear, and in a way, I truly was. I breathed horror on and off screen. Each script I accepted delved deeper into dark themes: possession, necromancy, invocations, pacts, all of this, of course, under the guise of art. I said it was just fiction, but deep down, something inside me knew it wasn't that simple. Over time, I came to believe that success and transcendence were the same thing. I lived surrounded by agents, producers, screenwriters, and directors who talked about energy, creative forces, spiritual manifestation. I thought it was cheap studio philosophy, but I didn't realize that those words opened invisible cracks. People play with the occult on screen, but what few know is that certain films don't just represent evil, they invoke it. The rituals we feigned in the scenes were often real. The ancient words, the acronyms authentic, and I repeated everything with conviction. In front of the cameras, success came like a golden storm. Houses in Beverly Hills, jet trips, private parties in producers' mansions, 1,000 milliliters of champagne, lines of powder on silver platters, promises of eternity and contracts signed with false smiles. What seemed like glory was just a mirror clouded by empty vanity. Inside me, something was drying up. I laughed in interviews, but I slept with nightmares. I started hearing sounds on the sets, seeing shadows where there was no light. Cameras broke without explanation, microphones picked up voices when no one spoke, and I, the rational professional, said it was a technical coincidence. It was during the filming of my last film, The Shadow of the Abyss, that everything fell apart. The plot revolved around a man who sells his soul for eternal fame. Pure irony. The S was heavy, the air seemed dense, heavy. The director demanded realism in the invocation scenes and brought a spiritual consultant to ensure authenticity. I remember the cold I felt when that man entered the studio. He didn't seem to be there just as a production extra. There was something in his eyes that pierced me. That night we were filming a final sequence. I was surrounded by villagers reading a text in Latin before a symbol drawn on the floor with metallic powder. The crew laughed, thinking it was just another night of filming. I recited the words. The lights flickered, a smell of burning iron invaded the air, the cameras froze, the sound burst, and at the exact moment I shouted the last line of the script, a burst of light and sparks erupted from the electrical panel. Everything went black. They said it was a short circuit, that the equipment discharged and hit me with enough voltage to stop my heart. I fell right there in front of the symbol, my body convulsing. The crew rushed over. Doctors were called. The room descended into chaos, and I simply ceased to exist. But what no one saw was what happened to me next. There was no golden tunnel, no peace, just absolute silence followed by a sensation of falling. I saw the studio from above, minus my motionless body, the panicked crew, the spiritual consultant standing in the corner, smiling discreetly. At that moment, I realized, I was no longer part of the scene. I was the script. Prestoli, what no camera could capture had begun. The hell I'd faked on screen had truly opened its door for me, and that's how I discovered that some films don't just tell stories, they invoke them. The film sets were modern temples erected not to the creator, but to the ego. Each production became an invisible altar, where worship was directed to the image, to applause, to the projection of power. When the cameras started rolling, everyone changed. The director's gaze became that of a priest of another faith. The actors, puppets driven by the need to be seen, and I, the protagonist of the cult, believed I was just acting, but in truth, I was offering myself in sacrifice to fame. Behind the scenes were a parallel universe. There were more rituals than rehearsals, more masks off-screen than on-scene. In the dressing room, before filming, makeup artists and costume designers did what they called energetic preparation. They burned herbs, lit incense, recited mantras, and some producers demanded that phrases be repeated to attract the right vibrations. At the time, I thought it was all harmless, an artistic eccentricity. Today I realize it was a reverence for something that didn't come from the light. The room seemed to glow, but the glow was cold, metallic, artificial. Between scenes, conversations revolved around success, influence, followers, contracts, almost never about purpose, kindness, and family. The language was different, good energy. The character's spirit, invoking emotion. The line between act and reality disappeared, and when the script called for me to portray evil, it wasn't just acting. Some directors encouraged profound experiences, saying the actor needed to open the inner channel for the character to enter. I laughed at these expressions, but the laughter began to bother me when the dreams became nightmares. I remember one set in particular, dark, with walls covered in painted symbols for an exorcism scene. The art was fictional, but the paints had been copied from ancient manuscripts. One of the technicians commented, half laughing, that he felt the air heavier whenever those marks were exposed. I, the skeptic, said it was my imagination. The next day, 3 cameras burned out simultaneously and a spotlight fell by itself, nearly hitting an actor. The entire studio froze, but the director insisted it was great for the film's atmosphere. Real fear cells, he said. I agreed, not realizing what I was feeding. Fame is a drug disguised as a reward. It doesn't destroy suddenly. It eats away silently. You start accepting small concessions, then big compromises, until your conscience becomes a supporting character. Post-shoot parties were celebrations of excess, the tables laden with drinks, bodies, and promises. Everything felt like freedom, but it was captivity under neon lights. There was a void no audience could fill, a constant echo begging for more applause, more attention, more anything. Once, during the production of a feature film in New Orleans, a veteran actor said something to me that I only understood much later. He looked at me, lighting a cigarette, and murmured, "Here we play God, Jonathan, and every time we play, something sacred dies a little." I laughed and changed the subject. Today I know that man was telling the truth, because that's exactly it. The more things happen behind the scenes, the less people become characters, even off-screen, and their hearts are shaped into what they pretend to be. In the last few years before the accident, I began to notice signs of wear and tear that weren't physical. The easy laughter of premieres felt fake to me. The interviews, rehearsed scripts of vanity. I saw young actors being molded by the same machine that molded me, an industry that promises eternity but delivers oblivion disguised as fame. The directors talked about art, but art became an instrument of manipulation, and when evil is portrayed with enough glamour, it ceases to seem evil. There were scenes that seemed like churches of a different kind, with invisible idols. People made promises for roles, traded dignity for contracts, their bodies for prominence. Every close-up was an offering, and I was the most devout of all. My entire life revolved around applause, the sound that, for me, replaced the voice of God. It was in this state that I entered the filming of The Shadow of the Abyss. I no longer had any restraint. I accepted everything they asked of me, strange symbols, ancient words, scenes that bordered on the profane. I said it was art, that the audience needed to feel reality. Deep down, I just wanted to be remembered, even if it was for something corrupting, and the price for this surrender came in the most brutal form. When the short circuit hit me, it wasn't just electricity that shot through my body, it was as if the very weight of everything I had represented had exacted its toll, and so, on the floor of that 7, I realized that the art I adored had become my altar of sacrifice. What came next? It wouldn't fit in cameras or scripts. But the real horror only began when silence took over and I discovered that the fiction I was selling was the exact reflection of my soul. The silence that followed the flash was absolute, no sound, no echo, just an infinite pause. I couldn't feel the pain, but I couldn't feel my body either. At first, I thought I was still unconscious. The time didn't move, the seconds didn't pass, and suddenly, I saw the studio from above. My body was sprawled on the floor, smoke billowing from the electrical panel, people running around, screams, cameras thrown to the floor. But what caught my attention wasn't the paramedics or the terrified director, it was the spiritual advisor's homing. He didn't move, he stood still, looking directly at me, not at the body, but at me, and I understood without words that he could see me. Something in his gaze chilled me. It was as if he were saying, "Now you are one of us." I tried to Greta, but the voice wasn't sound, it was intention, and no intention emerged. The air around me began to vibrate, as if the space had become liquid. The studio ceiling dissolved, and I felt a force pulling me back, away from the camera light. The material world faded like a screen after the final cut, and then the darkness wasn't the ordinary darkness of a closed room. It was alive, dense, heavy, and present. I felt as if something was watching, something ancient and impatient. I remembered the scenes I had so often acted out, the screams, the possessions, the rituals, and I realized that it had never been a joke. What we called art had always been an imitation of hell, and I, the protagonist, was now inside it. Everything I had pretended to feel during the recordings, the dread, the guilt, the despair, was now real and multiplied infinitely. The ground, if there was a ground, seemed to pulse above me. An unbearable cold pierced me, and at the same time, a suffocating heat burned from within. It was as if I existed in a space that rejected any balance, and in the midst of that emptiness, echoes began to emerge, familiar voices, phrases I myself had said in interviews, in films, in lectures on artistic freedom. Each word returned like a blade. Fear is just a concept, evil is fiction, hell is metaphor. Each of these sentences now echoed like mockery. I wanted to hide from myself, but there was nowhere to go. The darkness seemed to understand what I was thinking. The more afraid I felt, the closer it drew. I remembered Emily's prayers, except for the woman who tried to show me faith when I scoffed at everything spiritual. I remembered the notes she left in the dressing rooms, the verses I'd torn up laughing. It began to project itself around me, as if they were scenes on an invisible screen. I saw my entire life staged in sequence, not as a memory, but as a testimony. Every act, every word, every look of contempt, I had made talent a throne and the stage an altar for myself. Gradually, darkness took shape, distorted faces began to appear in the darkness, as if the void itself had eyes. I didn't understand what I saw, but I knew they were consciousnesses, presences that recognized me. Some whispered my name, others laughed, a laughter that came not from throats, but from within the mind. It was in that instant that I realized, I wasn't just in a dark place, I was in a dimension where every human choice becomes substance, and mine was imbued with pride. Amidst that chaos, a distant light emerged, so small it seemed like a mistake within the shadow. I tried to get closer, but the darkness itself reacted as if it didn't want to let me go. It was then that I heard, for the first time since the fall, a voice. It wasn't sound, but truth. You chose the stage and refused the altar. Those words pierced everything. They didn't accuse, they revealed. I understood that my death had not been a coincidence. The short circuit was merely the physical stop-start of a spiritual condemnation I had been constructing myself. Every film that extolled fear, every scene that trivialized evil, every line that mocked the divine, all were bricks in a wall I had erected between myself and God. The light continued to grow in the distance, and the closer it came, the more the darkness retreated, screaming voicelessly like sake. But that was then I realized that the clarity wasn't coming from outside, but from someone, a presence, and that presence saw me not with anger, but with pain. I knew immediately who it was, even before I fully saw it. The true director had entered the depths of my soul. The light advanced like a silent dawn, dissolving the darkness around it. The closer it came, the the more all that was darkness writhed and fled, and we felt it, but not ordinary fear. It was lesser dread mixed with reverence, a sudden awareness of being before something absolutely pure. For the first time since I'd left my shamed body, the light didn't hurt me, but revealed me. It pierced my essence and exposed every intention, every lie disguised as talent, every ambition sold as art. I saw what I truly was, a man who mistook spotlights for purpose, applause for acceptance, fame for love. The presence emanating from that light didn't need to announce who he was. No name was spoken, and yet I knew he was the same one my wife mentioned in the prayers I ridiculed, the same one I cited in movies, only as a cultural symbol, the same one who endured crosses while I searched for cameras. Jesus, not the distant Christ of paintings, but the living God, clothed in such intense glory that the very concept of beauty seemed small before him. When his eyes met mine, there was no condemnation. There was truth, and that truth pierced me like fire and peace at the same time. He didn't ask anything, I just saw. I saw my whole life before him like a film projected in space. I saw the small choices that opened great chasms. I saw every time I used my gift to corrupt instead of heal. I saw how my interview lines encouraged young people to mock faith, to treat the sacred as a joke, to seek fame as if it were redemption. I saw the scripts I accepted for money, even though I knew they tarnished what is holy. I saw the looks of wounded people who were inspired by me and walked toward the same emptiness. The light around Jesus was alive, it pulsed with love, and even as he showed me everything I had destroyed, that love didn't diminish, on the contrary, it grew. It was then that I realized the terrible contrast. The more I saw my misery, the clearer his mercy became. I knelt, Okwa, who was Joe I know, out of body, and I cried in a way I had never cried in my life, tears that came not from my eyes, but from my soul, and even without a voice, I begged for forgiveness. He came closer. The light surrounding him wasn't distant, it was warm. When he reached out, I could see the marks. They were still there, open, alive, shining like wounds that breathed eternity. Each one said, wordlessly, I loved you. Despite everything, his gaze was like ocean and fire at the same time, depth and strength. I couldn't bear it and bowed my face, and it was at that moment that I heard his voice. It wasn't sound, it was truth entering inside me. Jonathan, you used the gift I gave you to spread darkness, turned art into an instrument of idolatry, sold lies as beauty, called fear entertainment, and led many to turn away from the light. But I didn't create you for this. Those words came not as a sentence, but as surgery. They hurt, but they healed. Each sentence peeled away layers of deception I had worn like skin. I tried to respond, justify, say it was all just acting, that no one really believed it, that it was just fiction. But before the thought could form, he replied, reading my heart, nothing is just fiction. When the spirit is involved, what is created with the heart shapes the invisible. You opened doors and didn't realize it. He then showed me scenes I'd never seen in my life, much less the spiritual behind the scenes of what I produced. People watching my Rendell Domodo films, but absorbing despair. Young people fascinated by symbols I thought were merely scenic and yet carried the meaning of ancient rituals. I saw how entertainment became education for evil, how sarcasm became belief, how laughter against the divine created cold generations. I saw the result of what I called limitless art. You thought you were interpreting evil, he said, but, without realizing it, you spread it. You called fiction what was faith inverted. There was no possible defense, and yet, at the end of each vision, his light remained, no anger, only compassion. He placed his hand over me, and all the darkness that enveloped me receded. The presence of evil fled like smoke before the wind, and then he said, you couldn't bear heaven with the heart you had, but I called you to witness. You will see where pride leads, then you will return and tell. When he finished speaking, behind him appeared something immense, a door that seemed made of absence, a threshold of absolute darkness. I understood, without explanation, that it was the final result of human choices. Jesus walked ahead, and I followed him, not out of courage, but because his presence was the only thing holding me together. the reality around folded like burning paper, and what came next was no longer the world, it was the eternal reflection of the decisions we made. While we still breathe, the light advanced like a silent dawn, dissolving the darkness around us. The closer it came, the more all that was darkness writhed and fled, and the fear, but not a fear like a lesser, it was a dread mixed with reverence, a sudden awareness of being before something absolutely pure. For the first time since I left my body, the light didn't hurt me, but revealed me. It pierced my essence and exposed every intention, every lie disguised as talent, every ambition sold as art. I saw what I truly was, a man who mistook spotlights for purpose, applause for acceptance, fame, food, and love. The presence emanating from that light didn't need to announce who it was, no name was spoken. And yet I knew, he was the same one my wife mentioned in the prayers I ridiculed, the same one I cited in movies only as a cultural symbol, the same one who endured crosses while I searched for cameras, Jesus, not the distant Christ of paintings, but the living God, clothed in such intense glory that the very concept of beauty seemed small before him. When his eyes met mine, there was no condemnation. There was truth, and that truth pierced me like fire and peace at the same time. He didn't ask anything, I just saw. I saw my entire life before him like a film projected into space. I saw the small choices that opened great chasms. I saw every time I used my gift to corrupt rather than heal. I saw how my speeches and interviews encouraged young people to mock faith, to treat the sacred as a joke, to seek fame as if it were redemption. I saw the scripts I accepted for money, even though I knew they tarnished what is holy. I saw the looks of wounded people who were inspired by me and walked toward the same emptiness. The light around Jesus was alive, she pulsed with love, and even as she showed me everything I had destroyed, that love didn't diminish, on the contrary, it grew. It was then that I realized the terrible contrast. The more I saw my misery, the clearer his mercy became. I knelt down, or whatever solace I was outside my body, and wept in a way I had never cried in life. Tears that came not from my eyes, but from my soul, and even without a voice, I begged for forgiveness. He came closer, the light surrounding him wasn't distant, it was warm. When he held out his hand, I could see the marks, they were still there, open, alive, shining like wounds that breathed eternity. Each one said, without words, I loved you. Despite everything, his gaze was like ocean and fire at the same time, depth and strength. I couldn't bear it and bowed my face, and it was at that moment that I heard his voice. It wasn't sound, it was truth entering me. Jonathan, you used the gift I gave you to spread darkness, turned art into an instrument of idolatry, sold lies as beauty, called fear entertainment, and led many away from the light. But I didn't create you for this. Those words didn't come as a sentence, but as surgery. They hurt, but they healed. Each sentence peeled away layers of deception I had worn like skin. I tried to respond, justify, say it was all just acting, that no one really believed, that it was just fiction. But before the thought could form, he replied, reading my heart, nothing is just fiction when the spirit is involved. What is created with the heart shapes the invisible. You opened doors and didn't notice. He then showed me scenes I'd never seen in my life, less the spiritual behind the scenes of what I produced. People watching my films, laughing at fear, but absorbing the despair. Young people fascinated by symbols I thought merely scenic, yet which carried the weight of ancient rituals. I saw how entertainment became education for evil, how sarcasm became belief, how laughter against the divine created cold generations. I saw the result of what I called art without limits. You thought you were misinterpreting, he said, but without realizing it, you spread it. You called fiction what was faith inverted. There was no defense possible, and yet, at the end of each vision, his light remained, no anger, only compassion. He placed his hand upon me, and all the darkness that enveloped me receded. The presence of evil fled like smoke before the wind, and then he said, you couldn't bear heaven with the heart you had, but I called you to witness. You will see where pride leads, then you will come back and tell. When he finished speaking, behind him appeared something immense, a door that seemed made of absence, a threshold of absolute darkness. I understood, without explanation, that it was the final result of human choices. Jesus walked ahead, and I followed, not out of courage, but because his presence was the only thing holding me together. The reality around me crumpled like burning paper, and what came next was no longer the world, it was the eternal reflection of the decisions we make while still breathing. To walk through that door, it wasn't like walking, it was like being transported into a mirror that showed the side no one wants to see. The light of Christ walked before me, and everything it touched became calm, but beyond the reach of that clarity there was only absence. It was a void that had form, it looked like space, but breathed despair. It was as if the universe had been inverted and love withdrawn. There I understood that hell is not a cave of fire, it is the perfect experience of being far from God. What I saw were not bodies, but consciousnesses lost in echoes, each one trapped within their own story, repeating words, choices, justifications. I saw artists, producers, writers, people who, like me, had turned their talent into an idol. Some eternally relived their scenes, seeking applause that never came. Others heard the sound of applause and discovered that they were merely echoes of their own pride. It was a theater without an audience, a set where the lights never came on and the direct never called cut. Further on, I saw shadows that resembled crowds, each carried within them the images of everything they believed to be freedom, but which, in truth, was prison. There were people surrounded by memories of power, wealth, recognition, yet still empty. I saw screenwriters who wrote stories that mocked the sacred, now trapped within the words they created. I saw musicians trying to play songs without sound. I saw critics repeating sarcasms that now sounded like chains. With each viewing, I understood, what we call hell is the pure harvest of our seeds. Everything there was consistent with each soul's choice, no external punishment, no executioner, just the magnified consequence of decisions made without love. Every fragment of that place was the result of a will that preferred its own throne to the presence of God, and the absence of love is unbearable. Jesus walked among those souls with the same compassion he showed me. His light did not burn, he healed. Wherever he passed, for an instant, despair ceased. Some souls tried to get closer, but something inside them made them retreat. Pride, fear, refusal. I understood then that hell is not a sentence, it is a continuity. Those who spend their lives running away from the truth, when they find it, cannot bear it. The Master looked at me and said, "They are not here because I wanted them to be, they are here because they didn't want to be with me." These words sounded like a gentle thunder, and I wept. I realized that for years I had preached this same distancing without knowing it. Through my screens, my speeches, my vanity, I had also helped others believe they didn't need God. I saw the faces of young people who admired me, now trapped in doubt and emptiness. I saw the impact of what culture creates when it turns off the light and calls it art. The light of Christ enveloped me again, and the scene began to disappear. The shadows dissolved like smoke, and the darkness returned to silence. Then he said, "What have you seen? Pride builds, now you will see what grace rebuilds." And the darkness gave way to dawn. There was no horizon, only clarity. The sensation was of pure air. After a storm, I was back in the threshold between the world and eternity, and I felt the breath of life calling me again. The clarity intensified until it became unbearable to the senses, and then came the sound, a sound that seemed like wind and a heartbeat at the same time. I felt something contracting inside me, a pull that pulled me back. It was like falling upward, through layers of light and air. Suddenly, the weight returned, the weight of the body, of time, of pain. The first breath entered like fire. Briars saw the white ceiling, the artificial lights, the frantic movement of people in lab coats. I heard distant voices that became nearby screams. He came back, my God, he came back. The shock of life was brutal, terp. Every heartbeat sounded like thunder in my chest. Someone cried, someone laughed. A pale doctor stared blankly at the monitor, and then, among all those faces, I saw hers, Emily, sitting beside the gurney, her Bible open on her lap, her hands shaking over her face. When our eyes met, the whole world seemed to fall silent. She said nothing, she wept, and that cry said everything years of words couldn't. I tried to speak, but my voice was only a whisper. The first word that came out wasn't how or where, it was Jesus. The name came out charged with everything I was, everything I had denied. Emily understood immediately. She pressed her forehead against mine and repeated softly, "I knew he would find you." The following days were a miracle in a row. No brain damage, no trauma, no trace of the shock. The doctors called it an inexplicable case. I knew there was nothing inexplicable. There was mercy. As I rested, every memory of what I had heard burned within me like embers. The sound of voices trapped in absence, Christ's gaze, the phrase, "You will be a witness," all of this blended into a call that could not be ignored. Emily stood beside me, reading the psalm softly. I listened to her and wept. The same words I had once ridiculed now seemed like nourishment. Each verse was like an invisible stitch, closing the tear I had made in my soul. When I was discharged, the first place I wanted to visit was not the studio, nor the press, but a church. I entered with the same body, but a different essence. The simple walls, the sound of praise, the leather of ordinary voices, everything seemed more real than any church I had ever set foot in. When I knelt, I felt the sacred ground beneath my hands. There was no stage, no audience, no role. There was life, and for the first time, I gave it all. "Lord, use what's left of me," was all I could say. The following months were spent rebuilding. I sold the luxurious house, the cars, the contracts. I turned down roles that would have made me rich, but they stole me again. I began visiting hospitals, speaking at small meetings, telling what I'd experienced. At first, many laughed. They said I was using death as marketing, but little by little, others began to listen. Some cried, others began to pray again. Emily and I started together again. We got married, not out of guilt, but out of gratitude. Every morning, she read the scriptures with me, and at night, we prayed for those still living on the other side of the lens, those who sell their souls in exchange for applause. I understood that my mission was to be a voice within the same world that had once seduced me. I returned to the studios, but in a different way. It wasn't a sensation, but a sensation. I spoke to directors, screenwriters, and actors, telling them what I'd seen. I said it wasn't a metaphor, but a spiritual consequence, and I saw tears on faces that had previously been hardened. I saw hearts opening. Some films changed, others ceased to exist, and whenever someone asks me if I still believe in art, I say yes. But now it serves the creator, not the ego. Over the years, I've learned to live with the memory of what I saw, not as trauma, but as a prop. Every applause I hear today is an offering, not an addiction. Every word I speak is a disguised prayer, and when they ask me what really happened that night of the 7th, and I simply say, I died in front of the cameras and was reborn off screen, the story could end there, but it still writes itself, because each person who listens to me and chooses the light is a new take on the film of eternity. And now I know, true art is that which reflects the face of God. Everything else is just noise. Today, many years later, I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night with the echo of what I saw. It's not fear, it's memory, the memory of what it's like to be without God and what it's like to be touched by Him. When I look back, I see that nothing was by chance. The stage, the applause, the fall, the death, the return, all of it was there to help the message reach here. And it is simple. There is something beyond the last breath, and what we experience now is just the rehearsal. That's why I continue. I speak in churches, in studios, on the streets, where I'm invited and where I'm not. I speak to those who recognize me from my films and to those who have never seen me. I say that art is sacred when born of love, but becomes poison when born of pride. I say that fame doesn't fulfill, that luxury is dust, that vanity is a mirror without reflection, and above all, I say that mercy is still open, that no one has gone too far to be reached. Sometimes I return to the old recording sets. I enter the studios silently, where once I heard only screams and applause. Now I see only silence and dust. I walk to the exact spot where I fell and close my eyes. I feel the same cold as the day I die. But now it is a memory of grace. And Ali and Doril, I pray for those still lost among cameras and promises, For those who trade the eternal for the ephemeral, I pray for those who believe that living is collecting applause when living is learning to love. Every word I record, every testimony I tell, is a seed. Some fall on hard hearts and are lost, but others blossom where I never imagined. I've seen producers kneel, screenwriters tear up blasphemous scripts, actors return for their families, technicians